So this is lecture 2B, the inventors of photography. So now we're basically at the point where photography as we know it is in its early days and coming into its being. So the big major players, is Napis, there on the left next to him, Daguerre, then William Henry Fox Talbot, and then the kind of very strange Bayard's portrait of himself. So essentially, these are the pioneers of photography. Napis and Daguerre, they're in France. They actually start working together. Talbot is up in England, and Bayard is also in France as well. And so what they bring to the table, their early processes, for the most part, all of these are some type of silver-based process. If you remember the silver nitrate, so that's the base chemical of black and white photography. So Napis is working with heligraphs, sun writing, as he called them. Daguerre creates the daguerreotype. Fox Talbot creates the calotype and the tablotype. They're a type of salt prints. Essentially, he is the one who develops the idea of a negative, so that we're able to make, multiple copies of the photograph. And Bayard is a direct positive bleach process for his. So here we have the first known photograph by Napis. And for his photograph, the exposure time was 8 hours long. And basically, how it worked, this is referred to as a positive or a direct positive image. So that the final image that you have is positive. It's not a negative. I'll get to that in just a bit. So that when the sheet is, actually it's on the sheet of pewter, they put it on metal plates because they're, a little more stable, a little more rigid than a sheet of paper. And plus, all the chemicals and stuff that these things have to go through, kind of the wear and tear, paper was not as good for that at the time. Plus, like I said, this, the early days, so if you wanted to do any type of photography, you have to do everything yourself. So sheet of pewter with silver nitrate solution on there. And so in 1826, we have our very first photograph, actual photograph. So here is the actual image of the photograph itself. So it has been enhanced. Go back to it. Oh, it's not letting me, never mind. So it's been enhanced from the original version. So again, it's on, a sheet of metal coated there. And Daguerre has this fascination with dioramas and wanting to sort of create these dioramas and to add a little more, to them without having to do as much work. So he turns to, photography. So there in sort of the background of this diorama, is a photograph of the church. And so It took a while, but in 1839, that's when photography is announced to the world. They asked Francois Arago to give this presentation to the essentially the other scientists. We have photography. So it took about 10 years before they made the big announcement, mostly because, they want to perfect it. They want to make sure what they're doing turns out and that they're not going to disappoint anybody, basically. So here's Daguerre's, his daguerreotype. Again, it is a sheet of, he would use copper. What also became popular is tin. So if you ever heard of a tin type, it's because tin is the sheet of metal with the silver nitrate, the black and white photographic emulsion on there. And so in this photo, we have the first person photographed. This was like 20 minutes or so. So it took, quite a long time for photographs to work. And so when Daguerre set this up, took the photograph looking out on the streets of Paris, uh, Boulevard de Temple, the Temple Boulevard in Paris, outside a studio, a man there happened to stop long enough to be in the exposure where all the little blurry stuff on the sidewalks are people moving up and down the street. There's kind of some shadows and hints of shadows from carts that stopped briefly in the street. But because of the length of the exposure, people weren't in them. The other sort of drawback, we don't have a negative, so if you're going to do a family Christmas photo for 30 friends, you would have to do 30 photos. It also, again, early days, it flips left to right, top to bottom. Of course, you can turn it upside down so that it top and bottom are correct, but you can't fix the left to right yet. So there we have this man who stopped to get his shoe shine. So he stood there long enough to be in part of the exposure. So here is an example of an early portrait studio. So essentially, you had to have a lot of sunlight. Sunlight being the key thing. They didn't have electronic lights or anything like that, so you had to have natural light. Um, and so you have the person sitting there in a chair, and there's kind of this little shade over him to sort of control a little bit of the light so you don't get hot spots and things like that. You don't get glares in it. Anything that might look bad in the photograph. And then up top are the cameras, the little wooden boxes kind of suspended from the ceiling, so that everything's sort of at a, I guess you could say, pre-calculated distance. Again, you can't really focus these things that well. They really don't have a focus. You either move forwards or backwards with it instead of having a little a dial or something to do the actual focus with. So everything was sort of at this predetermined distance so that you could overcome any type of issues with focusing. And so to develop the image, you have to have a fuming box, so there's smoke involved with it, fixing the image. So that basically stops the process. It stops the image from, basically turning into a black sheet. And then along the bottom there where you could buy paints, or, different types of paints and dyes so that you could add color, because again, it's just black and white uh, images that we're dealing with. Color, while color is sort of being dabbled in a little bit, it's not really perfected and kind of available. So the only way to have a color image is to essentially, color it by hand. And so here is a chair that a person would sit in, and in the back you can see there's kind of this little clamp for your head. So basically, so you wouldn't move. Where, first the first images, you're sitting there for a few minutes, 5, 10 minutes sometimes, sort of depending on how much light and all that's available. Slowly over a period of time, as we'll get into a little bit, better cameras, better control over everything, so that the exposure time starts to decrease. And so there's a more fancy high-tech camera. So the little flap there is where you would put the sheet, photographic emulsion coated sheet, put that in a little flap. There would be a little release on the lens so that it would open the aperture. So I'd say this one is high tech because you can see sort of in the middle there's kind of the little accordion looking things. It's the bellows, so that this would be one where you can focus the image, and that's essentially moving the sheet, closer or away from the lens. And over a period of times where we get better lenses is where they start to correct all the flipping. But we're still, only one photo per plate. We don't have the negative just yet, so still pretty crude in a way. So here we have just, a daguerreotype in a case. So having a portrait done, that became, very popular, but at the same time, it's still kind of expensive. So oftentimes there were, real nice sort of fancy cases, it's kind of showing off and bragging that you could have a photograph done. So some other examples of daguerreotypes, like I said, portraits became very popular. And so here we have Captain Jonathan W. Walker's branded hand, his punishment for helping 7 slaves to escape. So one of the other benefits of photography is, now we're able to start recording visually. We don't have to rely on someone to sketch or paint or do anything like that. Now we have this device where we can start recording and we can start documenting. And we'll get into some of those ideas throughout this course. And so here we have a hand coloring kit for daguerreotypes. So it's often little dyes or watercolors. Basically, they're specifically blended, the chemicals and stuff, so that you can add the pigment to the image and it doesn't ruin the image in any way, unless you're just bad at trying to paint on these. So basically just, these thin washes, real thin coats of paint going on top of the black and white photographs to give the appearance of color. So here's a an example of a hand-colored daguerreotype. So moving up to England, we have William Henry Fox Talbot and his photographic drawings, as he called them. So as you can see, this is where we start to get into the idea of a negative. So the negative would be whatever black is white, and what should be white would be black. So you're reversing everything. That's the whole idea of a negative. It reverses so that when you expose it again, you get a positive image after that. So William Henry Fox Talbot, playing around, the camera lucid, doing sketches. So already, getting these ideas of projected images that we talked about in the first lecture. So here's a close-up of the little drawing where it almost appears as if he put a sheet of paper on top of a photograph to trace it, where he's actually using the camera lucida to create this image. So it's projecting this photographic image onto the sheet of paper that he traces. So here is Talbot's mousetrap camera. Yeah, same thing. You have to make your own equipment back then. It was not really available. So it's just basically a box with the lens shoved in it. So, and there we have an actual mousetrap right next to it. So that's kind of where he got the idea. And so here we have one of his early paper negatives, the lattice window. It's kind of hard to see, not exactly the best image quality, but nonetheless, he gives us the negative. From that negative, you're able to produce a positive. And so here we have the open door, uh, a Talbotype. So the Calotype negative with the Talotype finished print. So it's all sort of the salt based for for his chemistry. And so Talbot, really got into the idea of, these are nature drawings. So other thing is that the ideas of painting would be replaced by photography. Painters would give up paint and start using a camera. So that was, part of Talbot's kind of grand scheme. So he actually does the first, one of the first photo books. Again, you'd have to make your own book, his collection of photographs, but because of his process with the negative, you're able to make multiple copies. You're able to make multiple prints, in this case, of the open door. Whereas the daguerreotype, you just have the one single image. Same with the Priest's holography. You just have, the one image. So over a period of time, as all this is perfected, it's sort of Talbot's process becomes the winner. The Daguerre has a long-lasting power just because, like I said before, he's a very shrewd businessman. So that he basically goes after anyone and makes sure that his product is the best one out there. And so, with Talbot's idea of photography replacing painting. It's comparing the Peter de Hooch, his painting with Talbot's. How much difference is there? Same time, how much Talbot's exposure to uh, the courtyard of the house in Delft. How much did he see of it? So, pretty similar composition, setup, and all of that. So you can see where Talbot's getting the idea this could replace painting. In fact, we'll discuss that argument later on as well. So here's, his first photo book. So 1944, he starts to put together these different books. He refers to it as, pencil of nature. So like Napis, talking about his sun writings, because you had to use the sun as part of the exposure. The sun is what's, kind of giving the light and all of that to these. So hence pencil of nature, sun writing, all of that. So here, an example of one of Talbot's images, see there, 21-minute exposure. So inside times would take, quite a long time if you didn't have enough light. So if you remember back to the image of the Daguerre studio, where the whole ceiling basically is, one gigantic window to let all the light in so that you're not having to sit there for, 21 minutes. So just try to sit and hold the same pose for 21 minutes, see how long it lasts. So again, another example, calotype. Then also we have Bayard and his self-portrait as a drowned man with his direct paper positive. So it's similar to what the Daguerre is doing, but his process um, is actually better. You get a better image than the Daguerre. But again, Daguerre was very shrewd. The second someone else talked about photography, he was, real quick to sue them, try to make sure that uh, their product, so Bayard's process was kind of short-lived because of Daguerre, his shrewdness, and making sure that no one would stand in his way. Uh, so Bayard poses the self-portrait as a drowned man. He's drowned by all the red tape and the bureaucracy and all of that because of Daguerre. And if you read the little quote down there that Bayard wrote, that he's a dead man. There's nothing he can do. The government and everything, they love Daguerre so much, I might as well just die and no one would ever notice. It's kind of morbid and bleak, but kind of get the idea. So here's one of the examples. So if you were to compare to the Daguerre, daguerreotypes, it gets kind of fuzzy. It's not always the best, but then again, it's pretty primitive uh, technology that we are dealing with, and it's still more or less kind of mad science at the same time. So then uh, John Herschel, uh, an Englishman, so he also working working with some other photographic means. Uh, so one of the most notable things is the cyanotype, and the cyanotype is gets its name because it's blue. It's a salt-based emulsion as opposed to silver nitrate. So the different salts, it turns it blue. He invents a fixer so that if you remember back uh, the image with the shark egg sac, it never really stopped exposing. So a fixer is part of the chemistry that sort of kills any and all uh, photoreaction. It kills the whole process. It fixes the image. And he's also the one who came up with the name of photography. So he has, a bit of a background, science, mathematics, astronomy. So he's pretty familiar with all of this, anyways. And so here is a photograph of a telescope he actually helped to build. So it's a 40-foot telescope that you can see. So here's the frame for it. So he's working from, again, a paper negative. So pretty similar to what Talbot is doing. So again, like Hercules Flores, he feels he's not the only one who's come across this stuff. So Herschel's kind of hearing about it. He already has sort of the background with science, mathematics, and uh, lenses and things like that. So he decides, he's going to give it a go. And so here we have the cyanotype. So you can see it's that blue, cyan's blue. So there we go. Um, and Anna Atkins, she basically created an image or a book of different plants and, botany, botanists, plants, things like that. So here, where she would take algae. So this process where you would lay the algae, directly on the sheet of paper and put like a sheet of glass over it, hold it out in the sun, turns kind of this purpley brownish green color, rinse it off with water. Uh, you're done. That's all it sort of takes to do the cyanotypes. So it became, pretty popular. Some of the time, some people have heard of it as sun prints. Uh, so that is it for the end of lecture 2B. So the next will turn into looking at portraits and basically photography starting to become an art form.